Hello F1 fans, my name is Aaron and this is the 5 Red Lights. Today, I'm going to share my top 3 performers from the 2020 Italian Grand Prix. The 5 Red Lights are out in this video, so let's dive on in. So, third place on the top 3 performances of the Italian Grand Prix for me, Aaron, from the 5 Red Lights, goes to Lewis Hamilton. He wouldn't have made it if he had won the race, obviously. Pierre Gasly winning the Grand Prix in a quite sensational fashion. But if a casual viewer had switched off halfway through, they'd have been forgiven for assuming that Hamilton was heading for another easy win by several large seconds. But if they'd switched it back on at the end and seen the podium, you can imagine that the shock they would have received. Lewis's opening stint was just immaculate. It was a perfect start, and he cruised away at the front, managing the car as much as he needed to. Clearly, the fastest car on the track, pulling the gap out to Sainz in second place, and he was heading for victory. But one mistake undid the whole thing. I don't think you can blame driver or team predominantly, but between them, Mercedes pit wall should have seen it early enough. I know one of their engineers back in the Brackley factory managed to shout it down the headphones to them, but it was too late. Hamilton could have seen the lights on the outside, but he was looking at his steering wheel or looking around the corner. So pitting when the pit lane was closed and the resulting stop-go penalty, it sends him to the back of the pack. And you'd have been forgiven for assuming that he might not have scored points from there. Probably wasn't, considering the progress that Bottas hadn't made after his poor start. But Lewis fought back only as a champion could and should do, brilliantly overtaking the slower cars. I think he had a similar issue with the cooling and with the engine mode that they were set up for, because obviously they're set up, the Mercedes, to run at the front. So they don't need as much cooling. They don't need as much engine mode, because this is the first weekend of the single engine mode. But Lewis is Lewis. And unlike Valtteri, he found a way to pass the cars ahead of him, even when he reached Sergio Perez and Daniel Kvyat, cars that Bottas had struggled to get past. He hadn't managed to get past Norris ahead of him and then make inroads on Stroll. So Lewis makes these passes, gets himself up to P7, grabs the fastest lap point in the process. And as I said, had he gone on to win the race without any of the dramas, he probably wouldn't have made this top 3 this week. But he's battled back through the field, nips him in ahead of Lance Stroll and Lando Norris, who I was also considering for third place this week. But it goes to Lewis Hamilton because he fought back in the only way a world champion could do. Moving on then to second place. I've gone for Pierre Gasly. Perhaps you might find it surprising that the race winner, and a surprise race winner as well, is only number 2. But if you look at it, if you split his race into 2 halves, pre-safety car and red flag, and then post-safety car and red flag, they're 2 very different stories. But the safety car red flag period completely transformed his race. His race wasn't really going very far until the timing of that safety car and red flag. And this is a part of racing that simply just cannot be legislated for, although Renault famously choreographed it in 2008 at the Singapore Grand Prix. So Pierre was struggling with his soft tyres that he qualified on in Q2 and made it through to Q3. So he started 10th. And it was actually a team decision to free up Daniel Kvyat, who was on the hard tyres and not really demanding to be let pass, but just strongly making the case that Gasly's tyres were running out of life and Daniel's hard tyres were coming together nicely so that he could get some free air. Obviously, that is the right decision for the team to do, but unwittingly they put Gasly on course for the victory. Timing is everything in racing, and the way that the safety car and the red flag hindered so many people in this race and benefited so few namely Gasly and Stroll, were the beneficiaries. It was such a massive game changer. It put those two in such a strong position that they wouldn't have otherwise been in, because Gasly pitted early and Stroll didn't pit at all, and he got a free tyre change at the red flag. So then we go to after the red flag. Gasly makes a good start at the restart, passing Stroll, who struggled with wheel spin, and he takes second place. Once in the lead, though, after Hamilton's penalty, he did precisely just enough to claim the win by 0.415 seconds. So just half a second from Carlos Sainz. Although I think Sainz had the fast package, and that was evidenced by the fact that he did close up the 3.5-4 second lead that Gasly had once Sainz had passed Raikkonen. Nothing can detract from Pierre's win, though. This really proves the strength of his character after a really terrible 12 months, really, in terms of personal and professional struggles, really, over the last year or so. Obviously, he lost the drive with Red Bull at the summer break in 2019. Then he lost his childhood friend Antoine Hubert. But then it kind of picked up. He didn't sink in the way that Daniel Kvyat did when he was demoted to Toro Rosso. He picked up the second place in Brazil in that crazy race, and now he's bagged himself his first ever victory. A real feel-good moment for sport in general, not just F1. But congratulations to Pierre, a brilliant, brilliant win. But only second place on my top three this week. And my number one performer this week from the 2020 Italian Grand Prix is Carlos Sainz, even though he finished second. It was an outstanding weekend from Carlos. Let's start on Saturday morning. FP3, he qualified, puts in the second fastest time behind Bottas, 2/10 behind the leading Mercedes in that session. So he was ahead of Norris. They were second and third, the McLaren, sandwiched by the two Mercedes in the top four. And you thought, well, McLaren could be a bit of a dark horse, but we were expecting Renault and Red Bull to be just ahead of them in qualifying. But Carlos produced a stellar lap to bag third on the grid, sneaking ahead of the Racing Point of Perez, who snuck himself up there too. A quarter of a tenth. A quarter of a tenth. That is almost literally nothing. It's just it was so close, and the margins were so fine. And it was an unbelievable lap from Carlos. He was hanging out on the ragged edge, and he was shaking after after the lap. It's just phenomenal that these drivers are pushing themselves to these limits, and this is the reaction that we're seeing from them. Moving on to Sunday, the 5 red lights go out for the first time. His reactions were lightning fast. The car responds. Bottas has made a shoddy start and makes it really much easier for Carlos to just ease into a second place. I think they would have been battling on the brakes into the first chicane if Valtteri got away well, but he didn't, so Carlos had an easy second place. And from there, his pace was excellent, easing away to a clear second place. Norris was kind of holding everyone back. He had a bit of a buffer there, and on a regular day, he would have come out with a really lovely P2 behind Lewis Hamilton. Unlucky in the fact that Gasly struggled so much on the softs early on and ended up pitting before the safety car came out, but battling back up to second place, which is where he'd have got anyway had there been no chaos. An excellent performance. Was the win there? Yeah, it was, and obviously he would be disappointed to have missed out, but his day will come. But he may want to rethink his Ferrari move. Wonderful day for Carlos, wonderful weekend for him, and just a wonderful race in general for Formula One, because a podium of Stroll, Sainz, and Gasly was something like 1,666 to 1 or something ridiculous. Absolutely stupendous odds, but what a feel good story for Formula One heading into Mugello. So that's a checkered flag on this video. Thanks for watching. Leave a like, subscribe if you haven't, and let me know in the comments who your top 3 drivers were from the Italian Grand Prix. Check out the 5 Red Lights website. Follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Find our podcast on Google, Spotify, Apple, and many other podcast platforms. I'll leave all the links in the description down below. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next week when we look at the top 3 performers from the Tuscany Grand Prix Ferrari 1000 at Mugello. We'll just call it the Mugello Grand Prix. See you next week, guys. Bye for now.